The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Buckingham Palace as tourists gathered behind the ornate iron gates. Among them stood Marcus Thompson, a 22-year-old college student from California who had saved for 2 years to afford this European vacation. His backpack bulged with souvenirs, snacks, and, what he considered his most brilliant purchase from a London novelty shop, a pack of colorful water balloons that he'd bought on a whim the previous evening. Marcus had always been the class clown, the one who could make his friends laugh with elaborate pranks and silly stunts. His social media followers knew him for his outrageous videos, each one more daring than the last. Standing there in the crowd, watching the stoic red-coated guards maintain their perfect posture despite the growing heat of the July day, Marcus felt that familiar itch for mischief that had gotten him into trouble countless times before. The royal guards stood like statues, their tall black bearskin hats creating an imposing silhouette against the palace walls. Their faces remained expressionless beneath the shadow of their ceremonial headwear, rifles held at precise angles, boots polished to a mirror shine. These were the Queen's Guard, members of elite military units whose duty extended far beyond the ceremonial role most tourists perceived. Each man had undergone rigorous training, many had served in combat zones, and all took their responsibility to protect the royal family with deadly seriousness. Guard James Mitchell had been stationed at his post for 47 minutes. The 28-year-old Welsh guardsman from the Grenadier Guards had served 2 tours in Afghanistan before being selected for ceremonial duties. His muscular frame filled out the scarlet tunic perfectly, and his light blue eyes remained fixed on a point in the distance, trained to observe everything while appearing to see nothing. Despite the growing crowd and rising temperature, sweat beading beneath his bearskin cap, Mitchell maintained the discipline that had been drilled into him since basic training. Marcus pulled out his phone and began recording, a habit so ingrained he barely thought about it anymore. His thumb hovered over the water balloons in his bag as he watched the guards' unwavering stance. The idea had been brewing since he'd first seen the guards that morning during the changing ceremony. What would happen if someone actually managed to break through that famous stoicism? Would they crack? Would they react? The question swirled in his mind as he imagined the viral potential of such footage. The crowd around him was typical for a summer day, families with children, elderly couples with cameras, groups of teenagers taking selfies. Most maintained a respectful distance from the guards, understanding the unspoken boundary between tourist spectacle and military duty. But Marcus had never been one to respect boundaries. His friends back home often called him fearless, though his parents preferred words like reckless and irresponsible. Detective Inspector Sarah Chen of the Metropolitan Police's Royal Protection Unit observed the scene from her concealed position near the palace gates. The 35-year-old officer had been monitoring crowd behavior for the past hour, her trained eye picking out potential threats from the sea of tourists. Something about the young American with the backpack caught her attention, perhaps it was the way he kept glancing between his phone and the guard, or the nervous energy that radiated from his movements. Chen had learned to trust her instincts over 15 years in law enforcement, and, right now, those instincts were telling her to watch this particular tourist very carefully. Marcus's heart began to race as he made his decision. He'd come this far, spent this much money, and his followers were expecting content. The water balloons felt warm in his palm as he selected a bright blue one, filling it quickly from a water bottle. The latex stretched taut, creating a sphere roughly the size of a tennis ball. Around him, the crowd continued their chatter, oblivious to what was about to unfold. Guard Mitchell's peripheral vision caught the movement before his conscious mind processed it. Years of combat training had honed his ability to detect threats, and the sudden motion from the crowd triggered every alarm in his nervous system. His eyes remained forward, but his body tensed imperceptibly, ready to react. The rifle in his hands was unloaded, a fact known only to security personnel, but his training remained sharp, his reflexes primed. The water balloon left Marcus's hand in a perfect arc, spinning lazily through the summer air as his phone captured every moment. Time seemed to slow as the projectile traced its path toward the motionless guard. Marcus felt a surge of excitement mixed with terror, the kind of adrenaline rush that had driven him to increasingly dangerous stunts throughout his college career. This would be his masterpiece, the video that would finally make him internet famous. Detective Chen's hand moved instinctively toward her radio as she watched the balloon's trajectory. Her mind raced through protocols, threat assessments, and response procedures. An attack on a royal guard, even a seemingly harmless one, triggered a cascade of security measures that would mobilize dozens of personnel within seconds. Her finger found the emergency button as she began moving through the crowd, her eyes locked on both the projectile and its thrower. The balloon struck Guard Mitchell's left shoulder with a wet slap, exploding in a shower of water that soaked through his scarlet wool tunic and dripped onto the pristine white straps of his ceremonial uniform. The impact was gentle, barely enough to knock a civilian off balance, but the psychological effect was profound. For a split second, Mitchell's perfect composure wavered as cold water ran down his chest, and, in that moment, Marcus captured what he thought was his greatest triumph. The laughter that escaped Marcus's lips was involuntary, born from nervous energy and the surreal success of his plan. Around him, other tourists began to notice the commotion, some pointing and giggling, others looking shocked at the audacity of the act. Mobile phones appeared throughout the crowd as people realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. The ancient ritual of royal ceremony had been disrupted by a rubber balloon filled with London tap water. But Guard Mitchell's reaction was not what Marcus had expected. Instead of breaking character or showing anger, the guardsman's training kicked in with mechanical precision. His head turned slowly, deliberately, until his pale blue eyes locked onto Marcus's face with an intensity that made the young American's blood run cold. There was no anger there, no embarrassment, only the cold, calculating gaze of a professional soldier who had just been attacked while on duty. Detective Chen's voice crackled through radio channels as she reported the incident, her calm tone betraying none of the urgency she felt. "Control, this is Chen. Code yellow at the main gate, assault on guard position 3. American male, early 20s, continuing to film. Requesting immediate backup and crowd control." Her words triggered a coordinated response that had been rehearsed countless times but rarely implemented for real incidents. Marcus lowered his phone, suddenly, aware that his prank had crossed a line he hadn't fully understood. The guard's stare felt like a physical weight, pressing down on him with the accumulated authority of centuries of military tradition. Around him, the crowd was beginning to shift, some people backing away as they sensed the change in atmosphere. The laughter died in Marcus's throat as he realized that what he had seen as harmless fun might be viewed very differently by others. Within the palace walls, alarm bells were literally ringing. The security control room erupted into controlled chaos as monitors showed multiple angles of the incident, dispatchers coordinated response teams, and senior officers made split-second decisions about threat levels and appropriate responses. The fact that the projectile was only a water balloon rather than something more dangerous was confirmed within 30 seconds, but protocols demanded a full response regardless of the apparent harmlessness of the attack. Guard Mitchell maintained his position, water still dripping from his soaked uniform, but his eyes never left Marcus's face. The American tourist found himself unable to look away, trapped by a gaze that seemed to see through all his bravado to the frightened young man beneath. The rifle in the guard's hands remained motionless, but Marcus was beginning to understand that the true weapon here was not steel and gunpowder, but discipline, training, and absolute commitment to duty. Detective Chen pushed through the crowd with practiced efficiency, her badge visible but not yet announced. Her approach was methodical, cutting off potential escape routes while maintaining a non-threatening posture. She had dealt with dozens of incidents involving tourists and royal protocol, but something about this situation felt different. The deliberate nature of the act, the filming, the apparent premeditation, these factors elevated it beyond a simple prank into something that could have serious consequences. Marcus's hand trembled slightly as he continued to hold his phone, though he had stopped recording. The reality of his situation was beginning to penetrate the fog of excitement and bravado that had driven him to this moment. He was in a foreign country, had just attacked a member of the military while on duty at the home of the monarch, and had filmed the entire incident. The water balloons in his backpack suddenly felt like evidence of premeditation rather than props for harmless fun. The crowd's reaction was mixed and telling. Some tourists continued to watch with amused interest, viewing the incident as an unexpected bonus to their London experience. Others looked uncomfortable, sensing the underlying tension and beginning to understand that they were witnessing something more serious than a simple joke. A few had already begun to move away, either from embarrassment or a desire to avoid being associated with the incident. Guard Mitchell's training told him to remain in position until relieved, but every combat instinct screamed at him to neutralize the threat. The water balloon had been harmless, but it could just as easily have been acid, a knife, or something worse. His mind catalogued details about the attacker: height, weight, clothing, potential weapons, escape routes, accomplices. The young American's nervous laughter and obvious inexperience suggested this was likely a one-off incident rather than part of a coordinated attack, but Mitchell had seen enough combat to know that assumptions could be fatal. Detective Chen was now close enough to smell the nervous sweat emanating from Marcus, though her approach remained casual and unthreatening. Her hand rested near her radio, ready to call for additional units if the situation escalated, but her experience told her that the immediate threat was minimal. The greater concern was the precedent this incident might set if handled improperly. Other potential pranksters and attention seekers were undoubtedly watching, and the response would send a message about the consequences of such actions. Marcus's European vacation, which had begun with such promise just 5 days earlier, suddenly felt like it might end in a foreign jail cell. The water balloon attack that had seemed so clever and harmless in his hotel room that morning now appeared monumentally stupid in the cold light of reality. The guard's continued stare felt like a judgment, a condemnation of everything foolish and thoughtless about his character. The summer heat that had provided the initial justification for his prank, surely the guard would appreciate being cooled down, now felt oppressive and hostile. Sweat ran down Marcus's spine as he realized that dozens of security cameras had undoubtedly captured his face from multiple angles, creating a permanent record of his moment of poor judgment. The social media fame he had craved so desperately was about to become a very different kind of notoriety than he had imagined. Detective Chen reached Marcus before he had fully processed what was happening. Her approach was smooth and professional, designed to avoid creating a scene while ensuring he couldn't escape. "Excuse me, sir," she said in a calm voice that carried the unmistakable authority of law enforcement. "I'm Detective Inspector Chen with the Metropolitan Police. I need to speak with you about what just occurred." Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs as he turned to face the detective. She was smaller than he had expected, perhaps 5 feet 6 inches tall, with short black hair and intelligent dark eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of his appearance. Her plain clothes and casual demeanor might have fooled a casual observer, but Marcus could see the radio clip to her belt, the careful way she positioned herself, and the absolute confidence in her voice. It was just a prank," Marcus stammered, his California accent seeming absurdly out of place in this moment. "Just a water balloon. I didn't mean any harm." His phone felt heavy in his hand, the video evidence of his crime still displayed on the screen. The crowd around them had grown larger rather than smaller, drawn by the magnetic pull of unfolding drama. Detective Chen's expression remained neutral as she gestured toward a less crowded area near the palace gates. "I understand your intention may have been harmless, but I need you to come with me so we can discuss this properly. Please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." Her tone was polite but firm, carrying the weight of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Guard Mitchell remained at his post, water still dripping steadily from his scarlet tunic onto the ancient cobblestones below. The wool fabric had absorbed the water like a sponge, creating dark patches that would take hours to dry completely in the humid London air. Despite the discomfort and the breach of protocol he had just experienced, his posture remained perfect, his gaze now returned to its fixed position. Only those who knew him well might have noticed the slight tension in his jaw, the barely perceptible tightening around his eyes. As Marcus walked reluctantly alongside Detective Chen, his mind raced through possible explanations, excuses, and escape scenarios. None of them seemed particularly promising. He was in a foreign country with limited legal knowledge, had just committed what was undoubtedly some form of assault on a military figure, and had recorded the entire incident for posterity. The water balloons still in his backpack felt like they weighed 50 pounds each. Other members of the Royal Protection Unit were already converging on the scene with practiced efficiency. Detective Sergeant Michael Torres approached from the East Gate, his muscular frame cutting through the crowd with purposeful determination. The former Royal Marine had been with the unit for 8 years and had seen his share of incidents ranging from the bizarre to the genuinely threatening. His dark eyes surveyed the scene, cataloging faces in the crowd and assessing whether any of them might be accomplices or additional threats. Inspector Robert Hastings emerged from the palace grounds itself, his radio crackling with updates from the security control room. The 53-year-old veteran had been protecting members of the royal family for over 2 decades and had developed an almost supernatural ability to sense when situations were about to escalate. His weathered face showed no emotion as he approached Detective Chen and her reluctant companion. Marcus found himself guided to a small security office just inside the palace gates, a utilitarian room with white walls, fluorescent lighting, and the kind of institutional furniture found in government buildings worldwide. The reality of his situation became undeniable as the door closed behind him with a soft but final click. This was no longer a prank gone wrong, this was a formal police matter with potentially serious consequences. "Please have a seat," Detective Chen said, gesturing to a plastic chair across from a simple metal desk. "I'm going to need to see some identification, and then we'll need to discuss what happened out there." Her manner remained professional but not unkind, the approach of someone who dealt with foolish tourists on a regular basis. Marcus fumbled for his passport with shaking hands, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. The document felt foreign in his fingers despite containing his own photograph and personal information. "I'm Marcus Thompson," he said unnecessarily, since his name was clearly visible on the passport. "I'm from California. I'm just here on vacation." Detective Chen examined the passport carefully, noting the various entry stamps that documented Marcus's European tour. He had been in London for only 3 days, having arrived from Paris via the Eurostar. His tourist visa was valid, and there were no obvious red flags in his travel history. She photographed the relevant pages with a specialized camera before returning the document. "Mr. Thompson," she began, settling into the chair across from him, "what you did out there constitutes assault under British law. The fact that it was a water balloon rather than something more dangerous doesn't change the legal classification. You attacked a member of Her Majesty's Guard while he was on duty. Do you understand the seriousness of that?" Marcus's throat felt dry as sandpaper. "Assault? But it was just water. I thought. It was hot outside, and I thought it might actually be refreshing. It was supposed to be funny." His words sounded pathetic even to his own ears, the logic that had seemed so sound just an hour earlier now revealed as the reasoning of a fool. Inspector Hastings entered the room at that moment, his presence immediately commanding attention. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of years spent outdoors in all kinds of weather. His eyes, pale blue and remarkably sharp, fixed on Marcus with an intensity that made the young American want to disappear into his chair. "Mr. Thompson," Inspector Hastings said in a voice that carried the authority of decades in law enforcement, "I'm Inspector Hastings with the Royal Protection Unit. Before we continue, I need to inform you of your rights under British law. You are not under arrest at this time, but you are being questioned in connection with an assault that occurred on royal property. You have the right to remain silent, though anything you do say may be used in evidence. You have the right to legal representation." The formal recitation of rights made Marcus's situation feel suddenly and dramatically real. This wasn't going to be resolved with an apology and a promise to behave better. He was actually in trouble with the police in a foreign country, facing charges that could result in jail time or worse. His parents' warnings about his reckless behavior echoed in his mind with painful clarity. "Do you want a lawyer?" Detective Chen asked, her pen poised over a notepad. "If you can't afford one, we can arrange for duty counsel to represent you." Marcus shook his head reflexively, then immediately wondered if he was making another mistake. No, I guess not. I don't know any lawyers here. And I can't really afford to hire one." The admission of his financial limitations felt like another layer of vulnerability in an already precarious situation. Inspector Hastings leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Thompson, I want to be clear about something. The guards you see outside are not just ceremonial figures. They are active duty soldiers with combat experience, many of whom have served in war zones. They take their duty to protect the royal family very seriously. When you throw something at them, regardless of what it is, you're not just pranking a tourist attraction, you're attacking a member of the British military." The weight of that revelation settled on Marcus like a physical blow. In his mind, the guards had been little more than elaborate mannequins, tourist attractions in colorful uniforms who stood still for photographs. The idea that they were actual soldiers, perhaps veterans of real conflicts, had never occurred to him. The man he had hit with the water balloon might have faced enemy fire in Afghanistan or Iraq, might have lost friends in combat, might carry invisible scars from experiences Marcus couldn't even imagine. "I didn't know," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible. "I thought they were just. I didn't realize they were real soldiers. I'm so sorry." Detective Chen made notes as she spoke. "Ignorance isn't a defense under the law, Mr. Thompson, but your attitude and cooperation will be taken into account. Now, I need you to tell me exactly what happened, from the beginning. Why did you bring water balloons to the palace?" Marcus told his story haltingly, describing his purchase of the balloons the previous evening, his decision that morning to use them, and the impulsive moment when he had thrown the first one. His voice cracked when he described the guard's reaction, the way those pale blue eyes had locked onto his face with such intensity, the complete lack of fear or surprise, just cold professional assessment. "You filmed the incident," Inspector Hastings observed. "Why? I make videos. For social media. I have a YouTube channel and Instagram." Marcus felt foolish admitting it, but honesty seemed like his only option at this point. "I thought it would be funny content. I thought people would laugh." Inspector Hastings exchanged a glance with Detective Chen. They had dealt with similar cases before: tourists and attention seekers who viewed London's landmarks and institutions as props for their online personas. The rise of social media had created a new category of problems for law enforcement, as people sought increasingly outrageous content to feed their digital audiences. "Show me the video," Detective Chen requested, holding out her hand for Marcus's phone. Marcus hesitated, knowing that the video was evidence of his crime but unable to see any alternative to compliance. He unlocked his phone and navigated to the recording, his hands shaking as he handed over the device. Watching the incident again, from his own perspective, was surreal and deeply uncomfortable. The video clearly showed Marcus's deliberate preparation, the selection of the balloon, the filling with water, the careful aim. There could be no question about intent or premeditation. His nervous laughter was audible on the audio track, along with his excited whispers to the camera about what he was planning to do. It was, Detective Chen realized, a nearly perfect piece of evidence for the prosecution. "Mr. Thompson," Inspector Hastings said after watching the video twice, "this recording shows clear premeditation. You planned this attack, prepared the weapon, and documented your crime. This isn't a moment of poor judgment or an accident, this is deliberate assault on a member of the armed forces while on duty." The word weapon hit Marcus like a physical blow. A water balloon as a weapon seemed absurd, but, in the context of attacking a military guard, he could see how it might be classified that way. Every word the inspector used seemed designed to drive home the seriousness of his situation. "Are you traveling alone?" Detective Chen asked, making more notes. "Yes, ma'am. It's just me. My friends couldn't afford to come, and my parents." Marcus trailed off, realizing that his parents' disapproval of his travel plans was about to seem remarkably prescient. They had warned him about his tendency toward reckless behavior, his need for attention, his poor judgment when it came to consequences. "We'll need to contact the American embassy," Inspector Hastings informed him. "As a foreign national charged with a crime in the UK, you have the right to consular assistance. They can help you understand your options and arrange legal representation if needed." The mention of the embassy made Marcus's stomach lurch. This was really happening. His prank had become an international incident that would involve diplomats and official channels. The story would follow him for the rest of his life, a permanent reminder of the moment his need for online fame had overcome his common sense. Detective Chen continued her questioning, establishing Marcus's travel itinerary, his accommodations in London, his financial situation, and his plans for the remainder of his European vacation. Each answer seemed to dig him deeper into a hole of his own making. He had 3 more weeks planned in Europe, with bookings in Amsterdam, Berlin, and Rome. All of that was now in jeopardy. "Have you ever been arrested before?" Inspector Hastings asked. "No, sir. Never. Marcus's voice was barely a whisper now. "I've gotten in trouble at school a few times for pranks, but nothing like this. Nothing with the police." The irony wasn't lost on any of them. Marcus had escalated from school pranks to international incidents without apparently understanding the progression or considering the consequences. His need for increasingly outrageous content had led him to a point where he was completely out of his depth. Outside the office, Guard Mitchell had been relieved by a replacement and was changing into a dry uniform. The water damage to his ceremonial tunic would require professional cleaning and might take days to fully repair. But the physical inconvenience was nothing compared to the breach of protocol and security that the incident represented. In his 8 years of ceremonial duty, nothing like this had ever happened to him personally. Word of the incident spread through the palace security network with electronic speed. Within minutes, detailed reports were flowing to multiple government departments, from the Metropolitan Police Commissioner's office to the Ministry of Defense, and eventually to the private secretary of the monarch herself. What had begun as a tourist's thoughtless prank was rapidly becoming a case study in modern security challenges and international relations. Commander Patricia Williams, head of the Royal Protection Unit, reviewed the preliminary reports from her office overlooking the palace gardens. The 58-year-old veteran had overseen royal security for nearly a decade, managing everything from state visits to family celebrations. Her gray eyes moved efficiently across the incident's summary, threat assessment, and initial response evaluation. This wasn't the most serious breach she had handled, but it represented something potentially more troubling: the growing tendency of individuals to treat royal security as entertainment for social media. Marcus sat in the security office, his initial shock giving way to a growing understanding of the bureaucratic machinery that was now processing his case. Detective Chen had explained that multiple agencies would need to be involved: the Metropolitan Police, the Crown Prosecution Service, the American Embassy, and, potentially, immigration authorities. What had taken him 30 seconds to execute would require weeks or months to fully resolve. "Mr. Thompson," Detective Chen said, closing her notepad after an hour of questioning, "you'll be released pending further investigation, but you cannot leave the United Kingdom without permission from the court. Your passport will be held by immigration authorities, and you'll need to report to a local police station every 48 hours. The restrictions hit Marcus like physical blows. His carefully planned European tour was effectively over before it had really begun. The money he had saved for 2 years, the excitement he had felt about independence and adventure, the anticipation of experiences he would remember for the rest of his life, all of it was collapsing because of a single moment of stupidity. Inspector Hastings leaned forward, his withered hands clasped on the desk between them. "I want you to understand something, Mr. Thompson. We see incidents like this more often than you might think. Young people, usually tourists, who view our institutions and traditions as props for their entertainment. What you don't seem to grasp is that these aren't performances put on for your benefit. These are real people doing real jobs with real responsibilities." Marcus nodded miserably, feeling like a child being lectured by a disappointed parent. "I understand that now, sir. I really do. I wish I could take it back." "Wishing won't repair the damage," Inspector Hastings replied firmly. "Guard Mitchell's uniform will need to be professionally cleaned and restored. The security breach required a full response from multiple units, costing taxpayers hundreds of pounds in personnel time and resources. But, more importantly, you've demonstrated to other potential troublemakers that our guards can be targeted for entertainment." The concept of copycat incidents hadn't occurred to Marcus, but he could see the logic immediately. If his video went viral, and, given the nature of the internet, it probably would, how many other attention seekers would see it as inspiration for their own stunts? How many would escalate beyond water balloons to more dangerous projectiles or methods? Detective Sergeant Torres entered the office carrying a clear evidence bag containing the water balloons from Marcus's backpack. The remaining balloons looked pathetic and childish under the harsh fluorescent lights, like toys found in the wrong place. "We'll need to retain these as evidence," he informed Detective Chen, along with the mobile phone and any other recording devices. Marcus watched his phone disappear into another evidence bag with mounting despair. The device contained not just the incriminating video, but all his photos from the trip, his contact information, his boarding passes, his hotel confirmations, essentially his entire ability to function as a tourist in a foreign country. He felt suddenly, and completely isolated, cut off from the digital lifelines that had become essential to modern travel.
What about my hotel?
Marcus asked, his voice small and uncertain.
I need to check out tomorrow,
and all my confirmation information is on that phone.
Detective Chen made a note.
We'll help you contact your hotel and arrange for extended stay if necessary. You'll also need to notify your travel insurance company about the change in your circumstances. She didn't mention that most travel insurance policies excluded coverage for incidents involving criminal activity, leaving Marcus potentially liable for massive additional expenses.
The American Embassy's duty officer, Vice Consul Rebecca Martinez, arrived an hour later.
The 34-year-old diplomat had handled hundreds of cases involving American citizens in trouble abroad, from simple tourist mishaps to serious criminal charges. Her professional demeanor and familiar accent provided Marcus with his first moment of comfort since the incident began. "Mr. Thompson," Vice Consul Martinez said after reviewing the case file, "I need to explain your situation clearly. You're being charged with assault under British law, which could result in a fine, imprisonment, or both. As an American citizen, you have certain rights, but you are subject to British law while in the UK."
Marcus felt the last of his hope drain away. Prison? For a water balloon?
The courts don't typically distinguish between types of projectiles when determining assault charges, Martinez explained patiently. The intent to cause harm or distress, the targeting of a specific individual, and the successful completion of the act are what matter legally.
The fact that you used water instead of a rock doesn't change the fundamental nature of the crime.
Inspector Hastings had seen this moment of realization many times before, the point where foreign nationals truly understood that their home country's attitudes and laws didn't automatically apply everywhere in the world. American tourists, in particular, often seemed surprised to discover that their constitutional rights and cultural assumptions had no bearing on their treatment under British law.
What happens now?
Marcus asked, looking between the British officers and the American diplomat. You'll be formally charged and given a court date, Detective Chen explained. Depending on how you plead and the specific charges filed, this could be resolved relatively quickly or could drag on for months.
If you plead guilty, sentencing could happen within weeks.
If you contest the charges, you could be looking at a lengthy legal process. Vice Consul Martinez added, the embassy can provide you with a list of British solicitors who specialize in criminal law, and we can help facilitate communication with your family back home. We cannot, however, interfere with the British legal process or advocate for special treatment. Marcus thought about calling his parents and felt physically sick. They had opposed this trip from the beginning, worried about his tendency toward poor judgment and impulsive behavior. His father, a conservative insurance agent, had predicted that Marcus would find trouble in Europe. His mother, a teacher who had spent years dealing with the consequences of teenage pranks, had warned him that not everyone would find his stunts amusing.
Commander Williams reviewed the final incident report as the sun set over London.
The American tourist's case would likely be resolved with a fine and deportation, but the larger implications troubled her. Security protocols would need to be reviewed and possibly enhanced. Additional training might be required for guards dealing with social media-driven incidents. The balance between maintaining an accessible monarchy and ensuring adequate security was becoming increasingly difficult to manage. Guard Mitchell completed his paperwork in the guards' quarters, documenting every detail of the incident for official records. His fellow guardsmen had been supportive but also somewhat amused by the situation. Water balloon attacks weren't covered in their training manuals, though they all understood that anything thrown at them while on duty was a potential threat requiring appropriate response. The evening news picked up the story within hours, helped by the dozen smartphones that had captured various angles of the incident. Social media amplified the coverage exponentially, with Marcus's video being shared and commented on thousands of times before he was even released from police custody. The reactions ranged from outraged support for the guards to amused approval of Marcus's audacity, but the overall effect was to turn a private moment of poor judgment into a very public international incident. Marcus was finally released at 8 o'clock that evening, nearly 10 hours after his moment of foolishness had begun. He emerged from the police station into a London that felt completely different from the one he had entered that morning. Every police officer looked threatening, every security camera felt accusatory, every passerby seemed to know what he had done. His hotel room, when he finally reached it using a combination of written directions and the kindness of strangers, felt like a prison cell. Without his phone, he had no way to contact friends or family, no access to social media to gauge the reaction to his video, no ability to book transportation or research his legal options. He was truly alone in a foreign country, facing consequences he had never imagined. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by anxiety and the growing realization of how completely his life had changed in a single day. The European adventure he had planned and saved for was over, replaced by a legal nightmare that could follow him for years. His dreams of social media fame had been achieved, but in the worst possible way. The water stains on Guard Mitchell's uniform would fade, but the incident would become part of royal security training scenarios for years to come. Future guards would be briefed on the increasing tendency of tourists to view ceremonial duties as opportunities for viral content, and protocols would be developed for handling similar situations. Marcus's story was becoming a cautionary tale in real time, shared across platforms as both entertainment and warning. The comments sections filled with debates about respect for tradition, the excesses of social media culture, and the appropriate response to harmless pranks versus serious security breaches. Most commenters seemed to miss the human element entirely, a young man whose poor judgment had created consequences far beyond anything he had anticipated. The morning would bring meetings with lawyers, calls to devastated parents, and the beginning of a legal process that would determine his immediate future. But, as Marcus lay awake in his London hotel room, surrounded by tourist brochures for attractions he would never see, he was already beginning to understand that some mistakes couldn't be undone with apologies or good intentions. The guards would return to their posts the next day, maintaining their centuries-old vigil with the same discipline and professionalism they had always shown. But the incident had reminded everyone involved that tradition and modernity existed in constant tension, and that the price of maintaining both dignity and accessibility in an age of viral content was becoming increasingly complex to calculate. 3 weeks later, Marcus Thompson stood in the dock at Westminster Magistrates' Court, wearing the only decent clothes he had packed for what was supposed to have been a casual vacation. The navy blazer and khaki trousers that had seemed appropriate for European sightseeing looked pathetically inadequate in the formal courtroom setting. His hands shook slightly as he watched the magistrate, the Honourable Dame Catherine Thornfield, review his case file with the methodical precision of someone who had presided over thousands of similar proceedings. The legal proceedings had moved with surprising speed once Marcus had accepted the advice of his court-appointed solicitor, Maria Santos, and entered a guilty plea. The alternative, a trial that could have dragged on for months and resulted in a much harsher sentence if he lost, had seemed unbearable given his precarious financial situation and the complete collapse of his travel plans. Dame Thornfield looked up from the file, her gray eyes settling on Marcus with an expression that managed to be both stern and not entirely unsympathetic. At 62, she had seen every possible variation of tourist misconduct, from minor public disturbances to serious criminal acts. This case fell somewhere in the middle, not malicious enough to warrant prison time, but serious enough to require consequences that would hopefully deter similar behavior. Mr. Thompson, the magistrate began in a voice that carried the authority of decades on the bench, you have pleaded guilty to assault by beating against guard James Mitchell while he was performing ceremonial duties at Buckingham Palace. Do you understand the seriousness of this offense? Marcus's voice cracked as he answered, Yes, Your Honor. I understand now, and I deeply regret my actions. The past 3 weeks had been an educational experience that Marcus would never forget. Confined to London with no money for tourism and no phone for entertainment, he had spent his time reading about British history, royal traditions, and the military service records of the guards he had so casually dismissed as tourist attractions. The more he learned, the more ashamed he became of his ignorance and arrogance. Guard Mitchell sat in the public gallery, having been granted permission to attend the sentencing hearing. He wore his dress uniform, a sight that made Marcus feel physically sick as he remembered the moment of impact and the steady stream of water that had soaked through the pristine red wool. The guard's presence wasn't required for the proceedings, But Inspector Hastings had suggested that seeing the human consequences of his actions might provide valuable perspective for the young American. Maria Santos, Marcus's solicitor, had prepared a careful mitigation statement emphasizing her client's youth, his genuine remorse, his cooperation with the investigation, and his complete lack of prior criminal history. She had also arranged for character references from Marcus's professors and former employers, painting a picture of a fundamentally decent young man who had made a spectacularly poor decision. Your Honor, Santos addressed the court, Mr. Thompson's actions were undoubtedly foolish and disrespectful, but they arose from ignorance rather than malice. He has spent the past 3 weeks learning about the history and significance of the institutions he so thoughtlessly targeted, and I believe he now understands the gravity of his offense in a way that he simply didn't at the time. Dame Thornfield nodded slightly, then turned her attention to the prosecution. Crown Prosecutor David Hammond had handled dozens of similar cases and had developed a standard approach that balanced the need for punishment with the practical realities of dealing with foreign nationals who would likely never return to the UK. Your Honor, Hammond began, while we acknowledge that Mr. Thompson's offense was not motivated by malice, we must consider the broader implications of such behavior. The security of the royal family and the dignity of our ceremonial institutions cannot be compromised for the sake of social media entertainment. A sentence must reflect both the seriousness of the offense and serve as a deterrent to others who might consider similar actions. Marcus's parents had flown to London the previous week, arriving with a mixture of relief that their son was safe and horror at the situation he had created. His father, Robert Thompson, sat rigidly in the public gallery, his insurance agent's precision and attention to detail making him acutely aware of every legal and financial ramification of his son's actions. His mother, Linda Thompson, clutched a tissue and tried to reconcile the young man in the dock with the boy she had raised. The media attention had been relentless and largely unflattering. Marcus's social media accounts had been analyzed and criticized, his academic record scrutinized, and his family's background investigated by reporters looking for any angle that might explain or sensationalize the story. The viral fame he had sought so desperately had materialized in the worst possible form, turning him into a cautionary tale rather than a celebrated prankster. Dame Thornfield reviewed her notes one final time before beginning her sentencing remarks. Mr. Thompson, this court has considered all the evidence and submissions in your case. While I accept that your actions were not maliciously motivated, they demonstrate a serious failure to understand and respect the country you were visiting and the institutions that define our national identity. Marcus felt his knees weaken as the magistrate continued. The guards at Buckingham Palace are not performers or entertainers. They are serving members of our armed forces, many with distinguished military records including combat service in defense of this nation. Your treatment of Guard Mitchell as a target for your entertainment shows a profound disrespect that cannot be excused by youth or cultural differences. The courtroom was completely silent except for the scratch of the court reporter's pen. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat and his mother's quiet sobbing from the gallery. Everything hinged on the next few minutes of the magistrate's remarks. However, Dame Thornfield continued, I also note your immediate cooperation with the police investigation, your genuine expressions of remorse, and the character references that speak to your fundamental decency outside of this incident. I am satisfied that imprisonment would serve no useful purpose in your case and that you are unlikely to re-offend. Marcus felt a surge of hope, though he tried to keep his expression neutral. His solicitor had warned him that even avoiding prison didn't mean avoiding consequences, and the magistrate's tone suggested that significant penalties were still coming. You are sentenced to a fine of £3,000, to be paid within 30 days, Dame Thornfield announced. Additionally, you will perform 100 hours of community service working with military charities in the London area. This sentence is suspended pending completion of both the financial penalty and community service requirements. The fine hit Marcus like a physical blow. £3,000 represented nearly all of his remaining travel money and more than he earned in 2 months at his part-time job back home. The community service would require him to extend his stay in London indefinitely, further draining his limited resources and forcing him to miss the fall semester at university. Furthermore, the magistrate continued, upon completion of your sentence, you will be subject to a 5-year exclusion order barring you from entering the grounds of any royal residence.
Violation of this order would result in immediate arrest and imprisonment.
Inspector Hastings observed the proceedings with professional satisfaction. The sentence struck the right balance between punishment and proportionality, while the exclusion order would prevent Marcus from treating royal properties as venues for future social media content. The community service component was particularly appropriate, giving the young American an opportunity to understand the military community he had so thoughtlessly targeted. Guard Mitchell felt a sense of closure as the sentence was announced. Justice had been served without vengeance, and the young American would have an opportunity to make amends through constructive work rather than simple punishment. The incident had already become part of training scenarios for new guards, helping to prepare them for similar situations in an age of constant smartphone surveillance. Marcus's parents approached him after the hearing concluded, their faces showing a mixture of relief and continued worry about the practical challenges ahead. The fine would require them to drain their savings, and Marcus would need to find accommodation and employment in London for several more months while completing his community service. "We'll figure it out," his mother whispered as she hugged him, though her voice carried the strain of someone trying to convince herself as much as her son.
"The important thing is that you're not going to prison."
Robert Thompson was already calculating the financial impact and planning the logistics of an extended London stay. His son's moment of poor judgment would cost the family nearly $10,000 in additional expenses, money that had been earmarked for Marcus's final year of university tuition. Vice-Consul Martinez met with the family after the hearing to discuss the practical aspects of Marcus's extended stay. "The embassy can help you understand the work visa requirements for your community service," she explained, "and we can provide information about housing and employment options. This isn't the worst outcome we've seen, but it will require careful management." The media coverage of the sentencing was more balanced than the initial reporting, with several commentators noting that justice had been served while acknowledging Marcus's apparent genuine remorse. Some criticized the sentence as too lenient, while others praised the magistrate's emphasis on rehabilitation over pure punishment. Marcus began his community service the following Monday at a charity supporting veterans with PTSD and other combat-related mental health issues. The work was humbling and educational, bringing him into contact with men and women who had served in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other conflict zones. Many of them had stories that put his own troubles into sharp perspective. Working alongside former soldiers who struggled with invisible wounds from their service gave Marcus a deep appreciation for the sacrifices made by military personnel. He learned about the challenges of transitioning from combat zones to civilian life, the ongoing effects of trauma, and the importance of public support for veterans. His water balloon attack on Guard Mitchell began to seem not just foolish but genuinely offensive in a way he had never understood before. Guard Mitchell returned to his ceremonial duties with a new awareness of the complex relationship between royal security and public entertainment. The incident had reinforced the importance of maintaining professional standards regardless of external provocations, while also highlighting the need for ongoing adaptation to evolving security challenges in the digital age. The water stains on his uniform had been completely removed by professional cleaning, but the experience had left more permanent marks on his understanding of his role. Future tourists with cameras and questionable judgment would find him even more prepared for unexpected situations, though he hoped never to face another water balloon attack. Marcus's YouTube channel and social media accounts remained active, but the content had changed dramatically. Instead of pranks and stunts, he began posting videos about his community service work, interviews with veterans, and educational content about military history and royal traditions. The transformation surprised his followers, some of whom appreciated the maturity while others mourned the loss of his earlier irreverent humor. The original water balloon video continued to circulate online, but its context had shifted completely. Instead of being shared for entertainment, it was increasingly used in discussions about respect, consequences, and the responsibilities that came with social media influence. Marcus had achieved viral fame, but not in any way he had imagined or desired. His relationship with his parents had been strained but not broken by the incident. The financial and emotional stress had forced difficult conversations about responsibility, decision-making, and the difference between confidence and recklessness. Robert Thompson had taken a leave of absence from work to help manage the crisis, while Linda Thompson had struggled to explain her son's behavior to friends and colleagues back home. By Christmas, 6 months after the incident, Marcus was nearing completion of his community service and beginning to plan his eventual return to California. The young man who would board the plane home bore little resemblance to the carefree tourist who had thrown a water balloon at a royal guard on a whim. The experience had aged him in ways that years of normal life might never have accomplished.